Hello everybody, it is me, Riffraff Hornhelm, and I'm back again with another presentation from the Dwarven Vault. And today we have a monster review. Well, kinda sorta. What we're gonna do is talk about the act of turning an undead creature. And that's as is used in the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or what's known as 1E. Now, you've seen a number of monster reviews recently that are all undead creatures as we approach the All Hallows Eve celebration that goes on here shortly. So, it's kind of important to understand how that actually works. Now, turning can only be accomplished by a cleric or a paladin. And a paladin is not able to start turning creatures until they reach, I think it's 3rd or 4th level. And then they progress pretty much like a cleric does. The cleric, of course, is the most, experienced when it comes to turning and is the one who's able to do it earlier in their career. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on this next subject, but it is the alternative to turning. As an evil cleric or as an anti-paladin, you can use that turning power in reverse and then command undead creatures. Still have to make your roll, and the number that are affected varies. It usually can't be more than a dozen. Now, that power is obviously very useful if you're evil, but this game was really predicated as a battle between good and evil, and really is more heavily biased towards the good. And really what we're talking about as we go towards Halloween, where the forces of good are trying to protect the world and stop the forces of the night and evil as we go through this very macabre celebration. But turning in Dungeons and Dragons is a very important component, and it's what is one of the things that makes these creatures novel. First, they're undead, and it also is a very novel power for the clerics to wield and appropriate. So, of course, your ability as a cleric to turn the undead is in a large part based on your level. The difference in level is very severe. At the highest level of undead, you really can't even make an attempt until you're at least 8th level as a cleric. Now, that may not sound like that much in some ways, but remember in the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you were capped, at least by what the rules showed, and your cap was in the low 20s. I think it was 21 was the maximum level that they had rules for. Of course, that's not to say that there were plenty of dungeon masters who expanded beyond that. I certainly did. I know others who did. Until that level cap was expanded. But in the early days, once again, you had to even be 8th level to try, and you needed a 20. All the turning rolls are done on 1d20, and if you made it, that's great. You may have had special modifiers granted to you by your dungeon master or through, vis-a-vis through your god or something of that nature. But really, if you go by the chart, 8th level. And frankly, your ability to turn something that was high level is really not too doable until you reach about 14th level. 14th level and higher, a 13 on a d20 will turn a special. So let's talk about that list for a minute. Special is the most difficult. The lower, let's say the lowest 3 are like skeleton, zombie, and ghoul. At the high end of the chart, the highest is a lich. And you also have a vampire, and I think it's a ghost. But special is the most difficult. Now, special encompasses things like minor devils or lesser devils and minor demons. We've already had a couple reviews of some of those creatures. There's more coming. And on top of that, there's also some creatures that are not listed in that list that are considered specials, like the Night Hag and the Nightmare. Um, that list has grown over the years as more undead creatures have come from things like the Fiend Folio, I think is where the Revenant comes out, and then the Monster Manual 2, and it continues to grow. And some of them are really just variations of ones that came out in the original Monster Manual. So, what happens when you make your roll? Well, on the chart that's included with the original player's manual, and I think it's also in the DM's guide somewhere. God knows it's hard to find these things. The one I most frequently use is on the inside of my DM screen. My very original and very old DM screen. And it's really pretty simple. I mean, if you make the roll, you turn the creature, it turns away from you and moves away. Now, there's also something on that chart that's a D. And D is for destroy, or disperse, or disintegrate. However you want to look at it, it destroys the undead. Needless to say, there are some undead, particularly the demons and the devils, that have the opportunity to dissolve and return back to their home plane. Having said that, none of those have a D against them in the original rules. You'd have to be very high up level wise before it would become a destroy for a special or a vampire or a lich, some of the very most deadly and difficult to overcome undead creatures. So turning is not perfect, but the way you can make turning more interesting as a dungeon master is, of course, to come up with reasons to either enhance or diminish someone's ability to turn. Maybe they committed something that was kind of against their alignment. Their god is going to forgive them, but he takes away some of their abilities as a result. And therefore, as a dungeon master, you can punish them by saying, okay, well, now you're going to be -1 on any attempt where you try and turn an undead for, I don't know, forever, for a period of time, weeks, days, hours, whatever it may be. And of course, on the opposite side, if they do something very extraordinary, perhaps you reward them by saying, you now turn as if you were 1 or 2 levels higher. And that effect is going to last also forever, period of time, weeks, days, months, whatever it may be. Turning is an integral part of Dungeons and Dragons, and your ability to deal with undead. It's really critical to have components in your party that can deal with the vast array of undead creatures that are available in the game. That is a group that is, as I said, grown considerably over time. And it's something that can be really effective against a party if there's no cleric to help or protect them. So once again, when we talk about all these different creatures that are undead creatures that can be turned, or the lesser devils and the minor demons and so forth, it's really important to understand how difficult it is to do that. None of these creatures can't be surmounted, even by a relatively low-level party, but everything is critically based on the cleric and the understanding of the creatures you're up against and where their vulnerabilities lie. One important thing to go along with that idea is, in addition to having a cleric who's of, I guess, enough strength to be able to deal with the vast majority of the undead creatures, holy water. Make sure you lay in a good supply of holy water. That's if you know you're going to go up against undead. Holy water is very useful. Fire, of course, is very useful. One thing that isn't is cold. Don't waste your time. If you're a mage, don't select spells that have to do with cold. several others. Naturally, if they're undead, well, how are you going to paralyze them? How are you going to poison them? You can't hold them. They're not a living creature. There's plenty of things that won't work with a undead creature. But learn what does and what doesn't, and where they sit on the chart for turning relative to your party. You'll be glad you did. So that's a little bit about how turning operates and how it is a extremely important part, especially if you're dealing with undead creatures within the context of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or once again what we call 1E. Hope you found that informative, entertaining, interesting, all that kind of good stuff. And we invite you to come back and see us again in the future. We certainly appreciate your kind support. Take care, everyone, and remember, dwarves rock!